Okay, in this presentation, I'm going to talk through some of the important themes in Macbeth, and just to give you an overview, so that when you watch it, you'll have something to look out for and some themes to notice, and you'll see some of the things that we're really going to get into when we start reading the material on tragedy, and we're going to start talking about how these things fit together, and we're going to look at different theories of tragedy. We're going to look at Aristotle's theory of tragedy, especially, and we're going to spend some time with that. And we're going to look at the Schopenhauer-Nietzsche theory that was developed in the 19th century as well. So we're going to spend some time with the theories. So let's see how we can sort of take apart some of the themes and some of the ideas in the play to sort of orient us before we watch it. All right, so first a list of the dramatis personae, which is just a fancy way of saying the people in the play. And you'll see when the play opens, Duncan is the King of Scotland, and Scotland is ensconced in this civil war. Macbeth is fighting on behalf of the king, and when the play opens, Macbeth has this title of Thane of Glamis. And shortly thereafter, because he does so well in battle and stuff, he's given the title of Thane of Cawdor. That's an important detail in the play, because Macbeth doesn't see when that happens, and he doesn't know when that's happened. He finds out that's happened from talking to the Weird Sisters, so he thinks it's a prophecy, that he thinks it's sort of truth that's being spoken. But at the start of the play, he's Thane of Glamis. He becomes Thane of Cawdor when the actual Thane of Cawdor is revealed to be a traitor. He was working against the king in the civil war. So Macbeth is awarded this title of Thane of Cawdor. We see that in the play, but like I said, Macbeth doesn't see it, but we see it. And so Macbeth is sort of given these extra honors, and then eventually, as we'll see, the climax of the play, he becomes king when he kills King Duncan and becomes King of Scotland. Other people to look out for in the play: Lady Macbeth has a very important sort of psychological role in the play, encouraging her husband Macbeth to murder the king, to sort of seize the moment and sort of act on his ambition. So that's an important sort of psychological role. We see Malcolm, the king's son, as well in a lot of these scenes, and Malcolm flees eventually after the murder to England to rouse an army. Banquo, who is a thane but also a friend of Macbeth in the early part of the play, and we see the same with Macduff. They have sort of cordial relations, but that changes after Macbeth becomes king. And of course the other main players here are the Weird Sisters. And the so-called Weird Sisters are the sort of the three witches that appear in the play. Hecate is said to be queen of the witches, and there are these three Weird Sisters who appear in the play. They're referred to as the Weird Sisters, not as witches, in the play itself. And there's a lot of, you notice at the bottom, the ghost of Banquo and other apparitions. It's a very kind of dark and mysterious play. There's a lot of, it's sort of this psychology is very very sort of dark about Macbeth's reminiscences on the murder and his thoughts about the act that he's done, and his sort of deep sense of guilt. So it tends to be it has these very sort of dark themes to it that are sort of characteristically part of the play. All right, let's take a look at some themes. And the first most important theme, the sort of center of the play, is about the sort of psychological, this sort of trait of ambition, right? This sort of sense of ambitiousness, the desire to get something, the desire to get a position, to increase one's power and wealth. And as we'll see, Macbeth succumbs to that ambition in the play. And there are two things that really sort of kick on that ambition, or that really ignite it, as we'll see. One is the Weird Sisters, and you'll see that in the first meeting with Macbeth and the Weird Sisters. And and Banquo's with him at that first meeting. There's a second meeting later on in the play as well. So that sort of ambition is kind of highly relevant there. And also in relation to his wife, Lady Macbeth. Lady Macbeth sort of, pricks his ambition very intently and very determinedly, and sort of encourages him to sort of go through with this plan. You have to go through with it. You have to kill the king. So the nature of ambition and sort of what it brings, and here sort of Macbeth acting, sort of bringing forth what he wants by killing the king, and the sort of repercussions of that in the play, and how that changes his character, changes his sort of sense of security. He becomes deeply insecure as a result. So that's sort of a lot of the psychological richness of the play is portraying that ambition and portraying the effects and the consequences of that ambition. Okay, so a related theme is this idea of fate and the idea of free will, and this theme is really brought forth by the role of the three witches, the Weird Sisters, in the play. Incidentally, weird, this word in the Weird Sisters is an ancient word for fate, and it means something like fateful in this sense, right? So we think of fate as being about things that we can't control, things that we don't have any control over, things that happen to us regardless of what we do and what we say, right? So fate is almost like a force that sort of bears down on us and makes happen what's going to happen regardless of our own sort of decisions and choices and so on. So fate is often seen as sort of in contrast with free will, right? Where free will is the choices we have to do things, and those choices actually make our life what it is. So, are we the authors of our lives? Do we make our own choices, or is it the case that sort of fate is making decisions for us, and we just kind of play things of these bigger forces? So this is a really big theme that the play is raising with the Weird Sisters, and as we'll see, when they first meet Macbeth, they sort of hail him as Thane of Glamis, which he knows that's true, and then they hail him as Thane of Cawdor, which hasn't happened yet. He's not Thane of Cawdor. He doesn't know that he's Thane of Cawdor yet. And then the third sister hails him as king. Right, so there's this weird sort of this odd moment where Macbeth is sort of contemplating, and he speaks with Banquo about sort of what the Weird Sisters have said, and so this question of whether that's a kind of fate that Macbeth simply has to do what's necessary to bring about, right? So he sort of takes it upon himself to make that prophecy come true. The witches say to Banquo, who's with Macbeth, they say, "You will not be king, but you will be the heir of kings, or the father of kings, or something." And that sort of gives the impression that although Banquo is not going to be king, his children, and here we see his son Fleance in the play. So the suggestion is that Fleance will be king one day, although Banquo will not. And so Macbeth and Banquo are kind of discussing this after after meeting the Weird Sisters. So this is a theme as well about how far our own actions sort of drive our circumstance and our outcomes on, and how much that's fate, and whether Macbeth, in taking things into our own hands, into his own hands, is kind of seizing fate, or whether he's kind of playing with it and sort of making his own decisions and therefore being responsible for what's happening. That's a sort of central kind of question and conundrum in the play. Now, another big theme here is guilt, and its consequences on character and its relation to action, right? And specifically the high points of the play, the kind of climax of the play, when Macbeth kills King Duncan, right? And what we see after that is this kind of psychological, almost disintegration of Macbeth. He's totally consumed with the action he's done and the sense of guilt that this gives rise to. So we see that this idea of somebody doing an action, the action of killing, and then having their character kind of marked and imprinted by this action, and through the sense of guilt and how that works to kind of really disintegrate the character, his sense of action, his sense of meaning is, and his sort of, we see his paranoia when he's hallucinating these characters who we know are dead. So the act has a profound effect on Macbeth, and the sort of psychological insight of the play, I think, is its capacity to really show us the effect on character, the effect of this act, and what it does to Macbeth's character. So we see that in the second half of the play. So later in the play as well, and this happens right after Lady Macbeth has died, we see this famous soliloquy, which is basically a speech of Macbeth, which starts with this line: "Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow," continuing, creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time, and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out, out, brief candle, life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. So this is sort of Macbeth's speech on the meaningless of existence. There's no meaning to it. It's a tale told by an idiot. And he uses this idea of life's a walking shadow, a poor player. The allusion here, the analogy is to an actor in the theatre, right, which was obviously something Shakespeare is very familiar with. So it's like a poor act. We're all like poor actors that come on the stage. We sort of do our piece for an hour or however many years it is, and then we disappear, we die, we're heard from no more. But what's the meaning of all this? It's like it's full of sound and fury, but it signifies nothing, right? So it's that sense that life itself has no sort of meaning to anchor it down. It's this meaningless back and forth. All of our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. So it's just this creeping on of time with no sort of purpose and no direction. So this is a kind of a statement. It's a sort of statement of meaninglessness in the context of this sort of tragic situation that Macbeth finds himself in. So one thing worth thinking about when you're watching the film is, how do you feel about Macbeth during and also after the film? Aristotle tells us when we're watching a tragedy that we should feel pity and fear towards the tragic protagonist. That's Macbeth in this case, right? When we are watching a tragedy. So the sense of pity and fear, right? The sense of pity, the sympathy, our sense of sympathy with the protagonists undergoing these sufferings, right? Because we sense, Aristotle says, that it could happen to us. But we also, he says, feel this sense of fear because, for the same reason we feel we might be in that situation, that this could also be our situation. So we feel pity for the common humanity, but we also fear ourselves being in that situation. So this is the kind of duality that we should be sort of experiencing it in a tragedy. So if we're going to feel pity, then we should be able to see Macbeth's suffering as unwarranted or undeserved. There should be some element of undeserved suffering to make that work. When we talk about Aristotle's theory, we'll see his idea that tragedy works through this idea of unmerited suffering, that's what we kind of sense, and that's why we pity, because of course if suffering was actually merited, we wouldn't feel that sense of pity and sympathy towards the tragic protagonist.